USS Langley began as a Navy collier named Jupiter before conversion transformed her into America's first aircraft carrier in 1922. At 11,500 tons, with a flush wooden flight deck bolted atop her original hull, Langley could operate just 34 biplanes. Her crew nicknamed her the Covered Wagon for her ungainly silhouette, but she proved shipboard aviation was viable. Langley trained the Navy's first carrier pilots and developed essential deck procedures that would define naval warfare for a century. She was sunk by Japanese bombers in 1942, but everything that followed began with her. Converted from a battlecruiser hull under the Washington Naval Treaty, USS Lexington emerged in 1927 as a 36,000-ton giant unlike anything the Navy had seen. She could launch 78 aircraft, making her one of the most powerful carriers in the world, and her massive size allowed the kind of tactical experimentation that shaped carrier doctrine for a generation. Lexington went down fighting at the Battle of Coral Sea in May 1942, the first carrier versus carrier engagement in history. Her crew fought for hours before abandoning ship. She proved, in sinking, that carriers had replaced battleships as the decisive weapons of naval war. USS Saratoga shared Lexington's battlecruiser origins and 36,000-ton displacement, but wrote a very different story. Commissioned in 1927, she operated 78 aircraft and became a floating laboratory for carrier tactics throughout the 1930s. Where Lexington died early, Saratoga endured, absorbing multiple torpedo hits across 3 years of Pacific combat and returning to service each time. She launched strikes from Pearl Harbor to Iwo Jima, surviving the war only to be expended as a nuclear test target at Bikini Atoll in 1946. Even then, the blast couldn't sink her immediately. She finally slipped beneath the surface hours after the explosion. America's first purpose-designed carrier, USS Ranger, commissioned in 1934, at just 14,500 tons, was also her greatest early miscalculation. Treaty constraints forced compromises on armor, speed, and protection, leaving a ship too slow and vulnerable for Pacific combat. Her 76 aircraft capacity impressed on paper, but the limitations kept her confined to the Atlantic throughout World War II, where she launched strikes against Vichy French forces in North Africa. Ranger proved that treaty-driven economy produced inadequate warships, a lesson that directly shaped the superior Yorktown-class that followed her. Where Ranger disappointed, USS Yorktown delivered. Commissioned in 1937 at 19,800 tons, she carried 90 aircraft at 32 knots, balancing speed, protection, and striking power in a way no American carrier had managed before. Yorktown's design became the template for wartime carrier construction. She fought at Coral Sea, absorbing a bomb hit and returning to battle within days. At Midway, in June 1942, Japanese dive bombers finally sent her down. But not before her aircraft had turned the battle, sinking 3 Japanese carriers in a single morning. Yorktown's sacrifice helped change the course of the Pacific War. No American warship earned more battle honors than USS Enterprise. Commissioned in 1938 as the second Yorktown-class carrier, the Big E fought in virtually every major Pacific engagement: Pearl Harbor, Midway, Guadalcanal, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf. At 19,800 tons, carrying 90 aircraft, she absorbed bomb hits, torpedo strikes, and kamikaze attacks that would have finished lesser ships. The Japanese reported her sunk 6 separate times, earning her a second nickname, the Grey Ghost. Enterprise earned 20 battle stars, more than any other U.S. vessel, before being decommissioned in 1947. America's most decorated warship was sold for scrap in 1958. USS Wasp was built smaller than the Yorktowns specifically to use the remaining treaty tonnage allowance, a budget decision that cost lives. Commissioned in 1940 at 14,700 tons, she lacked the armor and damage control redundancy of larger carriers, despite operating 84 aircraft. Wasp ferried Spitfires to besieged Malta before transferring to the Pacific, where a Japanese submarine put 3 torpedoes into her off Guadalcanal in September 1942. Uncontrollable fires consumed the ship within hours. Her loss reinforced a lesson the Navy was already learning. Carrier survivability required size, armor, and redundant systems that treaty limits had never allowed. USS Hornet launched the war's most audacious strike. In April 1942, she carried 16 Army B-25 bombers to within 650 miles of Tokyo, aircraft too large to land back aboard, for the Doolittle Raid that shocked Japan and lifted American morale after Pearl Harbor. At 19,800 tons, Hornet fought through Midway before absorbing a catastrophic series of torpedo and bomb hits at the Battle of Santa Cruz in October 1942. Her crew abandoned ship, but she refused to sink. American destroyers eventually had to scuttle her as Japanese forces approached. She had served just 18 months. No ship in those months accomplished more. USS Essex gave the Navy something it desperately needed: a carrier that could be mass-produced without sacrificing capability. Commissioned in 1942 at 27,100 tons, carrying 90 to 100 aircraft, Essex launched a class of 24 ships that formed the backbone of America's Pacific offensive. Her improved damage control, enhanced anti-aircraft batteries, and greater fuel capacity addressed every lesson from earlier losses. The Navy also rushed 9 Independence-class light carriers into service from cruiser hulls, adding fast, flexible air power that Essex-class fleet carriers alone couldn't provide. Together, they overwhelmed Japan with numbers no single nation could match. USS Intrepid earned her nickname the hard way. Commissioned in 1943 as an Essex-class carrier, the Fighting One absorbed 5 separate kamikaze hits across the Pacific campaign, plus a torpedo strike that flooded her steering rooms. Each time, her crew fought fires and flooding to bring her back into action. At 27,100 tons, Intrepid launched strikes against Truk, the Philippines, and Okinawa, before returning home with 11 battle stars and a reputation for absorbing punishment that other ships simply couldn't take. She survived the war, survived scrapping proposals, and today serves as a museum ship on the Hudson River. No American carrier survived worse. Off Okinawa in March 1945, 2 Japanese bombs penetrated USS Franklin's flight deck and detonated among fueled and armed aircraft. The explosions killed 724 men and wounded 265 more in minutes. Franklin listed 13 degrees, dead in the water, while fires burned for hours. Her captain refused to abandon ship. The crew fought the fires manually as the burning carrier drifted toward Japanese waters. Somehow, they saved her. Franklin limped 12,000 miles home under her own power, the most heavily damaged American carrier to survive World War II. She never returned to combat, but her crew's tenacity became the Navy's benchmark for damage control. USS Bunker Hill had fought across the Pacific for 18 months when 2 kamikazes struck within 30 seconds of each other off Okinawa in May 1945. The attacks killed 346 men and wounded 264, igniting fires that threatened the entire ship. Her crew battled the flames for hours, flooding compartments and jettisoning burning aircraft over the side. Bunker Hill survived, but she was too damaged for further combat. At 27,100 tons, she'd proven that even well-designed Essex-class carriers remained vulnerable to determined suicide attacks, a lesson that would drive naval aircraft design for decades. Between 1943 and 1944, American shipyards completed 50 Casablanca-class escort carriers, in just 36 months, one ship every 18 days. Each displaced 7,800 tons and carried 27 aircraft, converted from merchant hulls in a production achievement that remains staggering. Slow, unarmored, and vulnerable, these small carriers nevertheless provided essential air cover for Pacific amphibious operations and anti-submarine patrols that fleet carriers couldn't spare time for. At Leyte Gulf, 3 Casablanca-class jeep carriers faced a Japanese surface fleet of battleships and cruisers, and somehow survived. Their mass production numbers overwhelmed every Axis calculation about American industrial limits. USS Midway was commissioned in September 1945, 1 week after Japan formally surrendered. At 45,000 tons, with an armored flight deck and capacity for 137 aircraft, she was the most powerful carrier ever built, arriving just as the war she was designed to fight ended. Midway adapted. She received an angled deck, steam catapults, and eventually operated F-4 Phantoms and A-6 Intruders through successive modernizations spanning 4 decades. She launched strikes against Iraq in Desert Storm in 1991, 46 years after commissioning. Her career proved that large, fundamentally sound designs could adapt to generations of aircraft and conflict. USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, the second Midway-class carrier, commissioned in late 1945 at 45,000 tons, spent 32 years projecting American power across the Cold War's most dangerous flashpoints. She deployed repeatedly to the Mediterranean, operating jets through multiple modernizations that pushed her World War II hull to its limits. Roosevelt launched aircraft during the Lebanon crisis and flew patrols off Libya before decommissioning in 1977. Her career demonstrated something important about the Midway design. It could absorb jet aviation, but each modernization revealed the growing gap between what 1940s hulls could offer and what modern operations demanded. The last of the original Midway class in frontline service, USS Coral Sea was commissioned in 1947 and served for an extraordinary 43 years. At 45,000 tons, she received an angled deck and enclosed bow before deploying to Vietnam, where her aircraft flew thousands of combat sorties. She returned to service through the 1980s, eventually operating 4th-generation FA-18 Hornets from a hull designed when propeller aircraft was standard. Coral Sea finally decommissioned in 1990, the longest-serving Midway-class carrier, outlasting both her sisters by years. Her service record is a testament to how far a good, basic design can stretch. USS Forrestal changed everything. Commissioned in 1955 as the first supercarrier built from the keel up for jet operations, she established the template every American carrier would follow for the next 7 decades. At 60,000 tons and 1,039 feet long, Forrestal featured an angled deck, 4 steam catapults, deck-edge elevators, and the ability to operate 90 aircraft, including heavy attack jets, impossible on earlier designs. Her size created capability no previous carrier could match. In 1967, a fire sparked by an accidentally discharged rocket killed 134 men off Vietnam, a disaster that transformed damage control and safety procedures across the entire fleet. USS Kitty Hawk served longer than any other American carrier in history. Commissioned in 1961 as an improved Forrestal-class ship, she operated 5 generations of carrier aircraft across 48 years, from propeller-driven aircraft through F-14 Tomcats to F/A-18 Super Hornets. At 60,100 tons, she launched combat missions over Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, serving through 9 presidencies and 3 separate American wars. Kitty Hawk was the last oil-fired carrier in US service, finally decommissioned in 2009. Her extraordinary longevity demonstrated what continuous modernization could accomplish, and set a standard of service that even nuclear carriers will struggle to match. Nuclear propulsion transformed the carrier from a powerful warship into a global instrument of policy. USS Enterprise, commissioned in 1961 as the world's first nuclear-powered carrier, demonstrated the difference immediately. At 93,500 tons, powered by 8 reactors, she could steam for years without refueling, operating anywhere on the planet without logistical constraints that limited conventional carriers. Enterprise's 1,123-foot flight deck operated 90 aircraft across 6 decades and 25 deployments to Vietnam, the Middle East, and Afghanistan. She served 51 years before decommissioning in 2012, the longest career of any American carrier, proving the nuclear concept beyond any reasonable doubt. USS. America's distinction was unique and controversial. She is the only carrier in history deliberately sunk by her own navy. Commissioned in 1965 as the last conventionally powered American supercarrier, she served 32 years, launching strikes in Vietnam, the Gulf of Sidra, and Desert Storm, while operating successive generations of naval aircraft. After decommissioning in 1996, the Navy used America as a live-fire test target for 25 days, subjecting her to explosives and weapons testing to gather survivability data for the new Ford-class design. She sank in May 2005. No carrier gave more, even at the end. USS Nimitz leads a class of 10 nuclear supercarriers that have defined American naval power for 5 decades. Commissioned in 1975 at 97,000 tons, with 2 reactors providing unlimited range, Nimitz established the design standard that would remain essentially unchanged through the class's final ship in 2009. She has deployed worldwide: Indian Ocean, Persian Gulf, Western Pacific, launching combat operations and projecting presence through crises from Iran to Afghanistan. The backbone of US naval power for over 50 years, Nimitz remains in service today, continuously modernized with new radar, weapon systems, and aircraft that her designers in the 1960s could barely have imagined. USS Carl Vinson will be remembered for one morning in May 2011. After Navy SEALs killed Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, Pakistan, the Al-Qaeda leader's body was transported to Carl Vinson in the North Arabian Sea for burial at sea, a decision made specifically to prevent any grave from becoming a shrine. The carrier's location and the operation remained classified for hours. At 97,000 tons, Carl Vinson has spent 4 decades launching combat strikes and conducting freedom of navigation operations. She has undergone a full nuclear refueling overhaul, extending her service to 50 years. History, however, will record her for that quiet morning at sea. USS. Theodore Roosevelt became the most publicly visible carrier of the 21st century for reasons no one anticipated. In March 2020, COVID-19 swept through her crew while deployed in the Pacific, infecting hundreds of sailors. Her captain sent a letter requesting urgent assistance that leaked to the press. He was subsequently relieved of command. Roosevelt made emergency port in Guam while the Navy grappled with an unprecedented threat. At 97,000 tons, she had launched strikes in Desert Storm, Bosnia, and against ISIS without incident. She returned to operations months after the COVID crisis, but the episode permanently changed how the Navy manages biological threats aboard deployed warships. USS. Abraham Lincoln earned historical notoriety twice. During Desert Storm in 1991, she deployed to the Persian Gulf for combat operations that helped liberate Kuwait. Then, in May 2003, President George W. Bush landed on her flight deck to deliver his "Mission Accomplished" speech, declaring the end of major combat operations in Iraq. A moment that became one of the most politically debated images of the war, as the conflict continued for years afterward. At 97,000 tons, Lincoln completed a 4-year refueling overhaul that extended her service life to 2054. She will still be operating when sailors not yet born today join her crew. USS George Washington became the first nuclear carrier permanently home-ported outside the United States. Commissioned in 1992, she deployed to Yokosuka, Japan in 2008, replacing conventionally powered USS Kitty Hawk and providing continuous American presence in the Western Pacific for 7 years. At 97,000 tons, Washington responded to regional crises, conducted freedom of navigation operations through contested waters, and demonstrated that nuclear carriers could maintain indefinite overseas presence. A strategic capability conventional carriers requiring regular fuel stops simply couldn't match. She returned to the US for her midlife refueling before deploying again, her forward presence mission proving the concept for all future Pacific deployments. USS Harry S. Truman has spent her career at the center of difficult decisions. Commissioned in 1998, she deployed to the Persian Gulf for operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, then to the Mediterranean for strikes against ISIS. In 2019, the Trump administration proposed decommissioning Truman at just 21 years old to save money, a proposal Congress rejected as strategically incoherent given the cost of her construction and decades of service remaining. At 97,000 tons, Truman represents the mature Nimitz-class design refined over 25 years of building. She continues deploying today, her near retirement a reminder that fleet-size decisions carry consequences that outlast any budget cycle. USS Ronald Reagan has stood watch in the Pacific for 2 decades. Commissioned in 2003 and forward deployed to Yokosuka since 2008, Reagan provides continuous American presence at the strategic center of great power competition with China. At 97,000 tons, operating the most advanced carrier air wing in service, she responds to North Korean provocations, reassures treaty allies from Japan to the Philippines, and conducts operations that deter the kind of aggression that her namesake president spent a career opposing. Reagan represents American commitment to the Pacific in the most tangible form possible. 100,000 tons of nuclear-powered presence that cannot be ignored. USS George H.W. Bush, commissioned in 2009, is the 10th and final Nimitz-class carrier, the culmination of a design that began with USS Nimitz 34 years earlier. At 97,000 tons, Bush incorporated every lesson learned across 9 previous ships: a bulbous bow for improved fuel efficiency, upgraded launch and recovery systems, enhanced survivability features, and refined crew arrangements that reduced manning requirements. She has deployed to the Mediterranean and Persian Gulf, launching strikes against ISIS and conducting operations that the first Nimitz-class carriers would have required more ships to accomplish. Bush bridges 50 years of nuclear carrier evolution to the generation that follows. USS Gerald R. Ford represents the most significant carrier advancement since Enterprise introduced nuclear propulsion in 1961. Commissioned in 2017 at 100,000 tons, Ford replaced steam catapults with electromagnetic launch systems, introduced advanced arresting gear, incorporated dual-band radar, and reduced crew requirements by 600 sailors through automation. Her systems generate 3 times the electrical power of Nimitz-class ships, enabling future directed energy weapons. Ford's development was troubled. Cost overruns exceeded estimates, and technical problems delayed full operational capability by years. But she is now operational, carrying proven technologies that will define American carrier aviation for the next half-century. USS John F. Kennedy, the second Ford-class carrier, represents the program's maturation. Commissioned in 2024, Kennedy incorporated lessons from Ford's difficult development, refined electromagnetic catapults, improved weapons elevators that plagued her predecessor, and cost reductions that brought her price below Ford's final figure. At 100,000 tons, Kennedy will operate F-35C Lightning IIs alongside future unmanned combat aircraft, projecting power in an era defined by competition with China and Russia. From Langley's wooden flight deck in 1922 to Kennedy's electromagnetic catapults a century later, American carrier aviation has continuously reinvented itself and shows no sign of stopping.